Windows 8 and how it relates to YUI. So we've done a bunch of work in YUI for the last release of 3.7.3 to get Windows 8 support. And over the last week or so, I've been kind of dabbling around in Windows 8 and just using YUI in general to see and trying to hack stuff up to see what can be done. So some of the stuff I'm going to show you today is pretty. It's not like it's still a little hacky. It's not super clean, but I think it demonstrates the ideas that I'm trying to like convey here. So I think how I'm going to do this is, and feel free to jump in at any point in time. I think how I'm going to do this is start off with an overview of Windows 8 and IE 10 in general, and then dig a little deeper into JavaScript specifically and Win.js, and then from there dig in deeper into YUI inside in Win.js and using those two in conjunction. So the first thing that we realized when we were dealing with Windows 8 is that there are 4 IE 10 environments, and I'm going to give you an overview of them. So this is this is actually a Windows simulator inside Windows, but this is the standard Metro interface, and you can launch IE 10 from here. And we call this like Metro mode or the Windows 8 UI mode. And essentially, it's IE 10 minus it has minimal support for Flash, ActiveX, and other plugins. This is the standard start button, start mode. So all default Windows users will probably hit this button first, because this is how the computer starts up. Then there's the regular IE 10, which is the one we've kind of grown familiar with, which is the standard browser. So that's not that interesting. Then the other two are actually interesting. One, I don't think we'll be working with that much, but it's a web view inside a C# app. So the way to think about that is, I can open it up for you here. So if you can make native apps in Windows 8 in 2 ways. One is through C# and the other is through JavaScript, essentially. If you make a C# app, what you can do is embed sort of the iframe equivalent, which is called a web view. And what that looks is something like in code. So essentially something like this. I don't know, it's kind of hard to see here. I'm just remote desktop into our Windows 8 box. Essentially, it's a web view, and you can specify width and height, and you can point it to a source. And that's actually running an IE 10 environment, so that's the JavaScript runtime. So if I open that up, that could point to yahoo.com or google.com or something. So that's useful for C# developers if they want to embed web HTML into their apps. The one that I find really interesting is the Win.js environment, which is what allows you to write native Metro apps using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So that's the one we're going to be spending some time on today, because I think it's really cool to be able to run native apps and then have access to native APIs and OS level APIs using JavaScript. So that's the first thing. There's 4 different kind of environments, and we're going to dig into the Win.js one in this like today, basically. And like I said, so it allows you to code native apps using JavaScript with access to native APIs. Some interesting things about the Win.js environment, though, is that it has restrictions, which the web environment doesn't. So one of them is inner HTML, for example. You can't pass in script tags, or basically malformed HTML, script tags, and other things, which will be cleaned out. So inner HTML is a very safe method. Whatever you pass into inner HTML gets passed down to this method called toStaticHTML, and there's some documentation here. Essentially cleans out a bunch of tags and won't allow them to be placed on the page. Another interesting thing about the Win.js space is that since it's a native app, they want to encourage offline use, and so your app can't have any external dependencies. So you can't have an external script reference, an external style sheet reference. Everything has to be kind of packaged inside the app. And there are more sort of nuances like this. And the documentation actually from Microsoft is pretty good about what's allowed and what's not allowed. So for example, another example is you can have an iframe inside the Win.js environment. Obviously, code inside the iframe can't execute, doesn't have access to the native API, so it doesn't have access to OS level stuff. But the Win.js namespace does. So there's some stuff like that. If you have any questions, just jump in. Is everything cool on your end?
Okay. I'm sure she's there. Let's keep going.
Okay. So the next thing I want to touch on is setting up sort of a Win.js app or a native app with YUI. So the way I did this right now is, this is kind of the app we'll be working with. And essentially what I did is I cloned YUI inside a lib folder. It could be any directory, but I only included the build files as opposed to the source files, and that's just for the app to minimize the app size. So there's two ways of doing this. One is to use the dependency configurator on yuilibrary.com directly, which is something like this.
Okay, I'm gonna put the link up on the blog post screen.
I think what we'll do is we'll put the link up. I'll write a blog post for this stuff too, and I'll put the link directly on that blog.
Yeah, I'm gonna embed the Hangout right now onto the current blog post.
Okay. So the dependency configurator allows you to kind of say, these are the modules that I'm interested in, and it gives you a script essentially here. And you can take the script. What you would have to do is you basically have to open up the HTML here, or the JavaScript file here, and save that into your project. What that allows you to do is to have a minimal JavaScript, which is essentially only the modules that you need. But that doesn't allow you to do YUI.use dynamically.
Hey, Alan.
So rather than that, hey Alan, can you hear us? All right, sweet.
Cool.
So rather than that, what I did was I just put the whole build directory inside inside this lib folder, and that allows me to do kind of YUI.add, YUI.use, and everything like that. The other interesting thing here is that if you want to have access to gallery modules, so for example, in my app here, I have access to Masonry, and I have access to gallery YQL sync. You have to include those in as well. Again, you can have external script references. So here I have y.mymasonry.js here, and model sync YQL. So again, the idea is everything has to be kind of packaged. And when I look at the file size for this, for whatever's in the build directory and the app size in general, I think it came down to the build directory is not that much. I forget how much it is off the top of my head. Let's see. So it's only 32 megabytes. So that's actually pretty small, right, in terms of app terms. So I think it actually makes sense to have a whole build directory in there, have access to all YUI modules, and then use YUI.use as you would normally. So that's okay. So that's the app structure. So then the other interesting thing about Windows 8 is your default apps. So let me just run this app so you can see what it does.
Hey, Tony.
So this app basically uses YQL to pull down shots from Dribble, which is like a popular design site, and then it kind of has like a master detail view, so you can click on one of these. So there's like you can click on like one of these, and then you can view like comments on that shot and other recent shots by that artist, etc. So it's a pretty simple master detail interface. So what I want to take away from this is how the Windows 8 structure works and how they expect you to make apps. So all apps on Windows 8, at least on WinJS apps, are single page apps. So this page actually looks something like this, this little mock-up that you see here. So all apps by default have a default.html page, default.js, and default.css. And those are so default.html is what's loaded when you launch the app. And the best practice there seems to be don't modify default.html, default.css, etc. Much at all. Instead, you want to have sub pages, like for example, home.html, which is what you see here. So everything here is pretty much home.html. You're not seeing any. There's no Chrome in default.html, and this allows you to navigate in and out of pages while default.html stays as like a Chrome around everything. So what we don't want is this sort of paradigm, where you go to home.html and then you go to a new page called page 2. And there's actually no way to get back to default.html from there. There's nothing that you can do to say get me back to here. Instead, what you want to do is do this, where you have default.html constant as a Chrome, and then you're navigating in and out. And they have WinJS has some useful APIs to help you with this, right? So one of the things I figured out was that instead of using href, which will do something like this.
Bump your font up.
Oh, it was one. Okay. Probably bump it up here. It'll probably only let me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it'll probably, you have to like kind of.
That's cool.
So I'll just refer to this side, and then you can look at the images on this side. So rather than kind of doing the href, which will take you to a brand new page, you want to do there's a method on WinJS called winjs.navigation.navigate, and that essentially allows for this navigation controller to kind of keep a hierarchy of what pages you're on. So that's one thing where you can't really go with the web standard way of doing this. You could, however, probably do an href, prevent default on that. You can't really go with the web standard. Sorry?
That was an echo for me, sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So you can do an href with a prevent default, and then do a navigate inside that, I guess. So that's one of the learnings.
Hey, Tony and Alan, are you able to see okay? Everything good?
Yeah, I can see fine.
Okay, cool. So then the other interesting thing here, let me close this down a little bit for a second. So the way this works in terms of MVC is that in this app, for example, you have a master and detail view. So each page has its own HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So in this case, the master view where you saw all the shots is grouped items.html, grouped items.js, grouped items.css. And then the detail view where you see the comments and recent shots is item detail. And the way this works, I think, is this JavaScript file I treat as a controller. So that's a controller for that specific page. And the HTML and CSS are the views for that. So this is the grouped items controller. This is the item detail controller, and those are the specific views. Now for the model, how WinJS does it is, at least from the templates, they have one global model, and in this case it's inside JS, and it's called ydata.js. So this page ydata.js is included in every view on the page. So it's included in grouped items.html, it's included in item detail.html. And one of the things that happens when you create a new app from a template, from a new kind of app from the Visual Studio template, is that the ydata.js is full of a lot of Win.js specific code. One of the things I did was take whatever's in ydata.js and take it out and make it so that it doesn't rely on Win.js at all, and instead just relies on the YUI app framework model list, and that lets you reuse your models across environments, so not just be restricted to Win.js. So one of the things I'm doing is I actually kind of butchered ydata.js completely and took out a lot of stuff from there, and instead made this module called ShotList, which is a model list subclass. Let me just make this bigger for you guys. You guys see that all right? Oh geez, battery.
That's fine, I'll get you a power
All right, sweet, thanks. That went down quickly. So yeah, so I have a ShotList subclass here, which is a YUI app framework model list. And it's basically responsible for querying against YQL, getting a list of all the shots back, grouping them by 3 categories, everyone popular and debut. And then once it's done, it tells the view, okay, reload the view and display all the shots, essentially. So ShotList is just the definition of that model. And then the individual shot itself with the comments and the related shots and the attributes such as width, height, background image, etc. is a y.model subclass as well. So this way, I think I'm able to reuse this code across, so I could use this on the web as well, rather than just be restricted to using it in Win.js directly. So that was one of the takeaways that I got there. And essentially, what happens is I instantiate a new shot list, and I'll get into what this Win.js binding list is. But I instantiate a new shot list, which is a model list subclass, and then the load function goes to YQL, gets all the content, comes back, and once it's loaded, I say, okay, get me the grouped items on HTML page, which is again the home page, and call the ready function on it, which will basically render everything down. So that was kind of my spin on how the default template works. And again, the default template is very kind of Windows specific, and my goal there was to kind of take stuff out, at least make it so that you can reuse your models across different environments, while your controllers will be very Windows specific, specific to this environment. Your models, and to an extent your views, can be reused.
So when you first built this, you ended up having to rip out a lot of Microsoft specific code, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other points, one of the other examples of when I had to do that, for example, is if when you go to this home page here, this is using a Microsoft specific list view, which is kind of like a view, and you pass in a data source to them. In this case, I'm passing in the model list, and it's grouped into 3 categories, and it renders this list view for you. But under the hood, what this is doing is basically DOM manipulation, right? Because everything is JavaScript and HTML and CSS here. So when you say create a new list view for me, it's going in and it's doing a bunch of DOM manipulations, adding a bunch of stuff to the DOM. And in the end, so you really don't get any performance improvement by going with the Microsoft route. All you get is, you don't have to worry about CSS because Microsoft knows that a list view looks like this, and so it'll pull in the CSS class names as appropriate. But if you took the time to create your own view, sort of, it's not really hard to create a list view like this, right? Like in CSS terms, it's pretty standard. It's just a grid view.
Do you know if it's cached on CSS and stuff ahead of time? Was it pulling it from?
So it's not everything, since everything is packaged inside the app. It's always cached, right? And how it works is, if you go to any page, so if I go to, for example, default.html, which is the standard Chrome, you'll see this at the top of every page. I don't know if you guys can see this. Let me open this up in Sublime. So at the top of every page is this stuff here, which is basically saying, this is the CSS theme that the Windows Metro CSS theme that I want to apply. These are some base, this is base JavaScript stuff, and Microsoft has its own way of defining classes and etc. if you want to do that. And then the UI.js is where all the UI widgets live. So if you want to make a list view or a grid view, that stuff gets pulled out from UI.js. So if you took the time, I think, to create your own custom views, you get the benefit of being able to use them in Firefox or in Chrome as well. So as an example of that, like I said, this page here is using a grid view. But when I go into, for example, this one, or they're all the same, really. So this page, for example, is not using any Microsoft-specific CSS or UI widget at all. So this is kind of my own CSS that I wrote. And what's happening here is essentially there's a div here which is floated left. They're all floated left relative to each other. So this is floated left with the image and some markup here. And then I have a comment section which is floated left against it. And I use y.masonry to create this brick effect here so that the comments seem to are stacked against each other. And then past that, recent shots is floated left. So there's some CSS, I didn't get to clean up the CSS too much, so you can see some difference in the heights here for the headings, but that's trivial. But the point here is that you can get a very similar effect to the standard Microsoft view by just using your own CSS. And it's actually not hard because since Metro has such a plain UI, since there's no gradients or like iOS, it's very easy to create the effect that you want using CSS. The only tricky part is everything is horizontal instead of vertical. So that was one takeaway that I had, is that you can actually take some time out to create your own views and your own CSS, and that way you're not restricted to using Microsoft-specific grid view implementations, which you can't use anywhere else, essentially.
Hey, welcome. Can you give us your name? Clarence.
Oh, that is Clarence. Hey, Clarence.
Hey.
So, okay, so any questions so far? You guys?
Clarence, I don't think we can hear you. You have your speaker on? No.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, great. Thanks.
All right, so are you guys good so far? Kind of with me?
Do just a quick rehash since we had a couple people join.
Yeah, okay. So so for the new guys that joined, essentially in like a very quick 2 minutes, I just went over the different IE10 environments in Windows 8. So we went over the fact that there are 4 environments. IE10 Desktop, which is the standard desktop mode. Then there's IE10 Metro, which is kind of this one here. And the difference there is this one is more prohibitive, doesn't allow for Flash, ActiveX, and other plugins. The third one is if you have a web view inside a C# wrapper, a C# app. And then the fourth one is what we're discussing today, which is the WinJS runtime, which allows you to code native apps in Windows in JavaScript, HTML, CSS. And then we went through some of the nuances about this runtime, what you can do, what you cannot do. And basically, the main points there are make sure the HTML that you're injecting is safe, doesn't have JavaScript in it, because it won't be allowed, and make sure it doesn't have malformed HTML. And make sure your app does not have external script references. So every script that you want should be packaged within the app. So we went through that. Then we went through, if you were creating a WinJS app, a native app, how would you include YUI inside it? And my best practice there is to basically have a lib directory inside the JS folder that comes with every WinJS app. And I clone YUI inside that. That obviously pulls down build, source, and some other stuff here. And I just include the build directory, so I right click on build and I go include in project. And that'll basically include those references, but it'll leave the source files out. And build comes to only 30 megabytes, so I think that's a pretty good way to just include all of YUI. Then the other thing I covered was if you want to include stuff from the gallery. So in this example, I'm using a get model sync and I'm using masonry. You want to include those as well. So I just include them like this, but it's up to you how you want to include them. You could just clone the build directory for those as well, I suppose, if you want. But the idea is don't have any external script references. And yeah, that's pretty much all we covered. And then we just went through some of the kind of paradigms that you're expected to follow. So by default, in Win.js, you have they're all single page apps. So you have a default of HTML Chrome, and then essentially when you navigate to another page, this is what happens here. Is you go to page 2.html, but the Chrome stays around it. And the way you do that is through a Win.js navigation API, and not through just ahref equals path to page.html, because that'll do something like this. And you'll have no way of going back to default.html.
In Chrome extensions, you can have an offline window. Can you do offline windows? Off-screen windows in?
Off-screen? Or
Well, they don't have a visual representation. Like in Chrome, you could have it's basically like a background window process that can do things.
I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that at all, to be honest. Yeah, the financial documentation.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that pretty much takes us where we were. So I was just talking about how we can reuse models and views by using the YUI app framework, which is what I do to represent these pictures here, instead of using standard Win.js models. And the same thing with views, how we can actually reuse views and write our own CSS instead of using Windows-specific views, which are actually a little tricky to work with. Yeah, so that actually takes me to kind of, looks like I covered most of this stuff. That takes me to another important point, which is in some of the things I learned while doing this, I guess. I'm not sure if these are best practices, but this is what I'm following for now. When you're making an app, you need access to like the model from all the different controllers and views sometimes, right? Especially for some app like this. You need access to that list of all the shots from pretty much. You might need it from a child view. You might need it from like a parent view. So if you're using in Win.js, there's a way to set. Let's say you have an array. You can set that array against a global namespace. So you can define a global namespace, and I'll show you how they do this here.
So I'm noticing that you're using Sublime Text. Is there anything better with Visual Studio, or?
Well, the problem with Visual Studio is there's so much Chrome around your editor, so and I'm just used to the Sublime Text like hotkeys and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the shortcuts. So I'm just used to using it. So what I do is I just code in Sublime Text, and then the files change in Visual Studio, and I just build from here.
Are there any benefits that you can do in Visual Studio? Like, is there like an easier way to integrate like test or any other like tooling inside Visual Studio?
Yeah, unit tests and stuff. I think you should be able to. I haven't looked into the unit test. Like, I haven't looked into Visual Studio integration. What I have looked into, and what I'll get into, is debugging on Visual Studio, and I'll actually get into that right now. So one of the things you can do is if you go when you're trying to build an app, if you go to simulator instead of local machine and build that. So Windows 8 has a Windows 8 simulator built inside it. So this allows you to fool around with like the tablet mode.
Oh wow.
So yeah, you can like flick around here. So it has pen input, like it has touch. You can simulate touch mode or mouse mode. We use this a lot for when we were testing events to see if they would work on Windows 8. You can also fool around with screen resolutions of the tablet. So you can try different screen resolutions and it'll give you different sizes to test out. So this is actually really nice. But the other useful thing you can do here is once this is up in the simulator mode, you can go to debug Windows DOM Explorer, and that allows you to select elements and check them out here. Which is really useful. I mean, this DOM Explorer kind of sucks. It's not as good as like the Chrome Web Inspector or Chrome Web Tools. But I actually discovered this yesterday. Remember I was talking about it? Yeah. So I discovered this after that, and it was useful because at least it helps you figure out kind of what's going on.
It's said it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
So there's a question from the chat. What do you guys?
Yeah, so the only thing I want to finish off with that is one of the things I was talking about before is that how this view here, this master view, is a WinJS list view implementation, which is basically like a list view with a grid view layout is what they call it. One of the things I was able to figure out is when I used the DOM inspector over this, I was able to figure out the CSS styles and the kind of the hierarchy of how these were laid out. So that allows me to kind of fake a grid view when I don't want to. Essentially have a grid view that looks like something that looks like a grid view, but it isn't really a grid view. So that was really useful. The benefits of this grid view essentially is if you add something to an array, it automatically gets populated at the end. But we can recreate those if we want to using your standard app framework views, and like the attribute change events would help us do that. So yeah, that was really cool. The DOM Explorer. Yeah, is there a question?
Okay, so the question is, in terms of the HTML markup, how does the default HTML, the Chrome, relate to the individual HTML pages? Are they iframes?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good question. So how it works is, I'll just show you the code. Essentially, if you look at, so this is item, let's go to the home page. So for example, this is grouped items.html, which is the home page, the master view that you saw. And looking at this HTML page, it looks like it's a standard HTML page. Starts from a doc type and ends with end HTML. But what happens is the only thing that gets added, I believe, are so this one is not a good example because this page is full of just templates essentially. This is their idea of if you're using a grid view, you have to create a bunch of these binding templates, and that tells the grid view where you want, what attributes you want in which elements, which is another reason why I didn't like using the grid view. Let me take you to another page. This is the item detail page, and essentially it's not an iframe. Everything inside this fragment will get appended to the default.html Chrome. Does that make sense? And that's why if you look at the this, let me open this again. So usually the fragment keeps getting replaced from page to page. If I look at the DOM inspector here, page control is the idea for the navigation. So everything's inside page control. And this one again just has templates. So this is probably not a good example. But I go into so you can see the div class item, the fragment gets basically appended to the page, and suddenly everything that was there before from the previous page is not there. So I believe in the code here in item detail, when you basically define like specific pages, and I believe you can pass in which fragments you want to be included. Does that kind of answer the question?
What exactly is default HTML? What's in it?
So default HTML has a few things. This is actually where I include the YUI min file. Rather than including it across all different pages, I include it in default.html, so it's available to me across the board. The other thing I include in default.html is the YUI config variable. So rather than, I'm not sure if this is best practice, but I found this to be kind of useful to me, is rather than having individual controllers define where modules live, I define the modules all here, and that makes it very easy for me to, in item detail.js, for example, just say I want masonry, right? And it goes in here and says, oh, masonry means YUI.js. So that's one thing that I have in default HTML. Um, Apart from that, just all default HTML does is it seems as if you have a navigation scheme like we have here, like a master detail, it sets up that navigation controller essentially, so that everything goes inside. Like we said, everything goes inside the page control navigator.
So everything is separate content basically for default.html.
Yeah, and these scripts are loaded on every page essentially. So yeah.
Jim says thanks.
No worries. So yeah, so we covered the DOM inspector. That's kind of that's very handy. We covered the simulator, which is also useful. So yeah, so the stuff. So this app actually is available on GitHub. It's still a little wonky around the edges. So I only had maybe like 2 days to work on it. But it's available here. So feel free to like download this and use it as a starter for now, or to fool around with it to see how I'm doing stuff. And if you have any feedback, just you can put an issue against me or just send me a pull request. I have some instructions here on how to get it set up. Basically, all they say is you have to include YUI. So some of the takeaways again that I learned so far from doing this is there's really not that much different about Win.js. That's not true about HTML in general. So everything that we're doing right now on the browser, we can take advantage of that for the most part. We just have to work around some of the workaround. We have to just work around stuff like no external script references, figuring out like making the UI look like it's a native UI, which is actually very important. Microsoft's done some good stuff here in the sense that if you just write, give me an H2 element, whereas in iOS, if you said I want an H2, if you were making an iOS hybrid app, let's say, and you said I want an H2 element, you then have to style that H2 element exactly like how iOS does it. So you'd have to figure out what font size does a normal H2 have on iOS. With Win.js, you don't have to do any of that. So for example, these are just H1s, H2s, and since I'm including this CSS file, Windows naturally takes that H2 and converts it so it looks normal, which is very nice actually. So by default, fonts and stuff you won't have too much problems with. The only issue is if you're creating your own views, make sure you kind of simulate the Metro interface. So that was one takeaway. Again, the other one, which I think is important, is using models that are not Win.js specific, so you can reuse them. Some of the code you have here will definitely be Win.js specific. So for example, all your controllers I expect to have some Win.js code. The way you define pages in Win.js is through this UI.pages.define method. This basically tells the app this is a page, so when I navigate to it, this is what I want to show. And that's going to be very specific unless the app framework somehow works around this. It's probably going to be Win.js specific like so. But stuff such as models shouldn't really have to rely on like your Win.js stuff, Win.js APIs, because there's nothing in there that's specific to one environment versus the other. One of the things we did in YUI 373 is included the YQL Win.js module. So whenever you use YQL in this environment, it pulls down, it uses cores instead of JSONP. So basically YQL works as you would expect under the hood, no problems. So again, that's another issue is the models.
Any performance issues? What did you know about performance in that?
When
you're running it on the device.
I haven't tested this app specifically on the device, so I can't speak to on-device performance. I dug a little deep into the. To me, it seems like everything that the Microsoft specific code does, UI.js, base.js, the UI.css, it's still doing DOM manipulation under the hood, right? So to me, whether you use, and all this JavaScript is, again, nothing is external, everything is packaged. So to me, I can't think of any performance hits that Microsoft could possibly be doing to say something like, if it's in our runtime, then make it. It's like part of the binary.
They don't call any proprietary APIs or off into some
controls or things?
Well, not that I've seen. Again, we're very like new to this, and I've just dug through some of the JS and just skimmed through it, and I haven't seen anything that kind of pops out at me. But again, these JavaScript files are huge, so they're like thousands of lines long. So I haven't had the chance to kind of go through everything.
What about anything YUI specific, like having to bring all the libraries in? Did you run into any issues with that? Where you had to bring the whole repository?
No, so actually it's very straightforward. So I would just clone the library inside. I would just create a directory called bib or whatever you want to call it. I just clone the library inside it, and I just include the build files. And the benefit of this is as YUI, if we go to YUI 3.8 and 3.9, you can just do a git pull and have the latest version of YUI to test against. That's one of the reasons I didn't include YUI in this project folder, is because that'll just make the YUI in there stale. And I think including the build directory is great because it's only 30 megabytes and it lets you do stuff like YUI.add, YUI.use. You don't do any manual work; it kind of just works out of the box, and that's one of the main takeaways, that YUI kind of just works out of the box. There's nothing in YUI that really breaks in WinJS.
So it doesn't try to fetch anything off the network, or that's all internal.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from our guests?
So how easy would you say it would be to like port application I have that's already on the web to like WinJS like application? Like how difficult would that be? How many changes would I need to make?
You'd have to probably change your controllers, and well, did you use what do you use for your models? I assume, do you have are they like model lists, or are they just standard arrays?
So let's say they're a model list, and they're just using the REST model sync for that matter.
Okay, REST. Okay, so then so you can fork those over, no problems. And then the controllers will probably have to change, so that you can specify the individual pages of the app. And as for the views, if you just ported the HTML over, I'm leaning to say it would probably work with minor inconsistencies. Like you'd probably have to include some script references to the header to include some of the WinJS stuff. But then the problem you'll have is it won't look native, right? So you'll probably have to do some work with the view, with the HTML and the CSS there and make it work. But functionally, it should work if you just change your controllers. And I'm not sure how much, if you're using a router, for example, I think router works in this environment, but it doesn't work. You probably want to use the WinJS specific controllers for now. I'll have to talk to Eric about this because I didn't use router for this project. I know the router tests all pass, but I'm not sure functionally how much it allows you to do. So I'll have to figure that out. So for now, I would just say worst case, you probably have to change your controllers and you have to change your views so that they look native.
Hey, do you think that it would be worth it to have a WinJS submodule for router to include as an environment changeover?
Yeah, because the big thing in WinJS right now, if we could figure out a way to say, go to this page using in router through I know it uses HTML history or something, and I think that works here. And then that under the hood tells it, I want you to create this new page in WinJS and navigate to it using the WinJS APIs. I think that'd be great because that would mean now that if that module could be conditionally loaded, then Clarence's controller on the web would theoretically just work on WinJS as well. And it wouldn't be pulling down any extra code on the web. It would just be pulling it down here. And that's not a big deal because it's all packaged internally anyways.
Yeah, that may be worth looking into, Clarence.
I wonder is how much that would be. It might be, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but some of this might, I haven't looked into the navigation API too much, but that's something that we could look into for sure.
Can you and the inspector set breakpoints like JavaScript?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can set breakpoints. It's pretty good. The console has support, you can log out objects and it works pretty well. So it's actually it's not bad to work on. It's just if you're good with Visual Studio, then I think you'll be pretty productive. I'm just not that great on Visual Studio.
Have you tried?
So yeah, just one more thing. Like, what about with like some of the things for building native apps? Like, I know that like WinJS might have a few things for accessing like the file system and stuff like that.
Right.
Have you played around with any of that at all?
Yeah, so you can do that. So I played around with it not on this app, but on the test app that I built for YUI a few weeks ago. Seems like, don't take my word for this, but it seems like if you're making an app using WinJS, you have access to two namespaces. One is the WinJS.namespace, and that's more for stuff like UI-specific stuff, widgets, views, etc. And then there's a Windows.namespace with a capital W, and that's more OS-level stuff. So you can write to file and do stuff like that inside that namespace. So they have a ton of documentation. Actually, Microsoft's not been bad with the documentation for WinJS and this Windows namespace. They have a ton of stuff on that. And so you have access to both of those. So you do have native and OS level access.
Does that stuff like play well with YUI though? Like, I'm just curious.
I don't think we use that stuff anywhere. The other thing is, like, local storage works in this environment too. Like, if I do window.local storage, that works here. And I know that because I use that for one of the older apps that I made.
About HTML5 file systems.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that. But if any of our modules use that, then it would we would have probably caught it in the test. So I'm not sure if HTML5 file systems. But so a lot of this is like, for example, local storage works, but then so does like Windows probably has a native storage API as well. So which one do you use? It's kind of figuring out the pros and cons of that. And since it's so new, I haven't really had the chance of kind of looking into the pros and cons there. But the good thing is that you definitely have more capability to do stuff on this than if you're making like a hybrid app on iOS or something. Right?
Can you do things like know if you're online, offline, things like that? Notifications.
Yeah, I have to look into that stuff. So I've kind of just been focused on the YUI aspect to this. So I'm giving a talk at YuiConf on building native apps for Windows, and I'll be covering some of the stuff I covered here, but some of the questions that Andrew's asking and that you're asking, Clarence, is something that I'll hopefully have answers to by then. And my goal is to kind of maybe write, for example, this grid view implementation that strictly as an YUI app framework view to save, and then link that with the YUI model list, just to show that you can actually kind of do this without going through the Windows WinJS specific route. Some of those answers I think I'll have they'll become clearer to me in like over the next 2-3 weeks. But yeah, I was just happy with how quickly you could kind of get an app out, and kudos to Microsoft for some of the ways that, stuff like this, the help with the CSS and stuff that they provide.
In terms of the tools, is everything free, or will you actually have to pay for Visual Studio? Is it free forever? Or?
I'm using Visual Studio Ultimate, which is apparently something will happen in 90 days. I'm not sure what. That's what it says. So Visual Studio Express is free, right? So I don't know what the difference is. Again, I haven't used Visual Studio in like 4 years. So anyone know what the difference is between Express and Ultimate?
I think it's just like a tooling difference. It's like there's a better integration with Windows Server or something like that. Don't take my word on that though.
That makes sense.
But like most of the stuff that you need to do for just building apps is there in just the Express version.
Yeah, Kim says Express is just limited to certain types of apps.
Okay, so yeah. And I'm using Sublime for most of my stuff. So I just use Visual Studio to build it pretty much.
Do you think they have any command line tools for building? Eventually, you would like.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, Visual Studio is a huge ecosystem. So it's just that I'm not aware of them, right? But I'm sure they have command line tools. The other thing is I just installed. So when I set up this Windows 8 box, I downloaded the GitHub for Windows app, and that gave me access. That's very useful. It gives you access to this GitHub shell where you can just do git commands, and it has. You don't have to do like Segwit or something like that.
It's almost like a Dropbox replacement.
Yeah. It's really useful actually. So you should do, that should be one of the first things you do when you install Windows 8.
Can you include that in the GitHub comments?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. The other thing I'm looking into is so Windows 8 has this concept of live tiles. I don't know if you've seen that.
it's like the thumbnail view, right?
Yeah, it's like I don't see any live tiles here right now, but essentially this finance app. If I opened it,
Maybe you have to add it to your desktop or something.
no, it's probably supposed to be there. So now it's locked. So now it's open. So now if I go back to the home screen, yeah, okay. I still don't see it here. Oh, here it is. So now it's live tile. So this will be changing and showing personalized content. So it'll change and show stock info, etc. I'm trying to figure out how we can do that. How we can what the APIs to do that as well. So you see how it changed there. So that's another thing that hopefully I'll have on my talk list on my talk in November.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you go a little bit more in detail about that? Like what does it do? It basically streams things to your desktop, or?
Well, essentially what it does is, yeah, you can specify what you want to show and I guess the delay, but I haven't looked into the API much at all.
So like an email app might show you your latest 2 emails.
Yeah, exactly, right, yeah, totally. Yeah, I actually really like that UI quick view sort of concept.
Beyond just developing the app, like have you looked into like publishing it all on the Windows App Store? Like, is there anything you think about that?
Right. No, I haven't actually. That's another thing that's been on my list. I know that up till like a few days ago, like the store just opened on Friday, so there's apparently a big queue right now to get apps of like apps that they're trying to clear, and it's like a curated store. So I haven't looked at publishing risk. Not. I have to basically look at like how long it takes to publish, but also what are they looking for. So the documentation lists some small things. So for example, they say I read this. Just remember it now is that if you use window.close in your app, it'll close the app. But if you do that, it's almost like you're crashing the app, and so they won't approve you. So I'm sure there's other things like that that are good practices and bad practices, and I have to look into that. So hopefully I'll have more information about that in like a few weeks' time for you.
Cool. Do we have any other questions in the world? Kim, do you have anything else?
Cool. So yeah, feel free to check this out on GitHub if you want. I'll add some more. I haven't decided. I probably will go with this, but I'll like make it better for my talk, or I might go with another app. I'm not sure. But yeah, feel free to check it out and use it as a template or something if you want.
Can you mention your username? It's hard to see.
Right. So it's just github.com. As you can see, probably bigger here. It's github.com/Tilo Mitra/sites. And yeah, all you have to do is pretty much just include YUI and have some instructions on that here.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Do you have any other last-minute questions?
Waiting
for Kim. Awesome.
Sweet. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Later, Clarence.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Yeah.